ago. You built it into the most successful hedge fund in the world. When you started, how did you learn to invest, and how did your investment strategy change over time?
Well, I learned from my mistakes. In other words, my instinct is, you go there and you place a bet. I've had winners and I've had losers. And what I did, every time I made a mistake, they became painful mistakes, but with time, I realized that reflecting on those mistakes would give me gems. What I would do is I'd say, why did I make that mistake? And I would learn from that mistake. And I'd write down a rule. So what was helpful for me is I put that rule, I wrote these principles down. Those principles that I wrote down, I then put into algorithms, in other words, equations. And what I learned by being able to do that is if I took my decision criteria, those principles, and then I tested them back through time, I gained a perspective that was fantastic. I could test them in back 100 years. I could test them in different countries, and I would learn how those rules worked. And by putting all those rules together and then having these algorithms, the computer could replicate my thinking, but it could actually think better than I could, because what it would do is it could process more information, it could process it faster, and it could process it less emotionally. So it was like having a GPS that was next to me while I was also making my decisions, like you're driving in a car and you have both operating. And to have that next to me was, invaluable. It would learn.
Is that you as well? Because you're more diversified. When I look at the way you set up your portfolio, it's not as niche as that some of these.
I'm big on diversification.
You're very big on diversification.
Knowing how to diversify well is more important than almost anything. People don't understand this.
Is that an evergreen principle, you think?
Yes, that's an evergreen principle.
Interesting.
And the reason I'm saying that, the way it is, it's almost like a casino making its money. Okay. The way that you do it is you get an edge. So now when you have to make a bet, I've got to bet against the whole world. The world has a view on something is reflected in the price. So when I think something is attractive or unattractive, that means I have to bet against the whole world and whether that's right or not. That's difficult. I get it right, more often than I get it wrong, but I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. And so when you can take a lot of different bets, what you can do is, like the casino, you'll get your average that your bet would be, but you'll reduce your risk of one of those tables not being the table that's paying off. And so that margin, so I can reduce my risk without reducing my return by knowing how to diversify. And I'd say that's particularly important for the people who are listening, your investors, because what they've got to
reduce risk without reducing return.
That's right.
That's the specialty.
That's right.
Elaborate a little bit more if you don't mind on that. So reducing risk without reducing the return, because a lot of times if I'm reducing the risk, it means my return's also going lower. But you're saying no, we're reducing it without even reducing the return.
Right.
I mean, that's a high-paying skill set to have.
It's the most important thing that you could start off doing. If you have a number of equally good likely bets, but they're uncorrelated, like the casino. One table is going to make me a margin like this, but take another table and it makes me a margin like this, but I might have volatility about those. Let me take all those investments that I think will make 10%, so that's my return, but they're uncorrelated with each other. That means I'll still get the 10. I don't lower my 10, but my diversification means I lower my risk. So I improve my return to risk ratio.
Is that an art that you can teach?
Oh, yeah. I wrote about it there's what I call a section in this book, The Holy Grail of Investing. It's 3 pages long. And it explains basically this important thing, because when that epiphany happened to me and how I would do it, it changed everything by being able to do that. Because
how old were you when you figured that out?
I can improve through diversification. I can improve my return to risk ratio by a factor of 5. So by diversifying, the return relative to the risk, I can keep my returns the same and reduce my risk to 1/5 if I know how to diversify well, and that's why I'm explaining it. It's not all that complicated. It's simply explained in the book. But in any case, that is the holy grail of investing, okay? That's a big thing. If you start to know that that's what you're going for. One of the problems is that the experience that you had as the last experience is the one that's going to stick in your mind and probably will not be the one that's going to get you. So that the next experience will be very, very different. I know my parents went through the Great Depression, and then they missed out on the boom because they were always thinking about that. And so I think that what they need to do is see all of those crises. That's why you can see inflationary ones and see all of those, and once you get that perspective, I would say three things to your generation, okay? Three recommendations. The first recommendation is to think about your savings and how much money do you have for savings. And the best way to think about that is to think, how much money do I spend each month and how much money do I have saved so that I can, how many months am I going to be okay without that? And to value savings, right? And calculate it, because savings in that is freedom and security, and think about what that is. So that's the first. How much do I have for that? The second thing is, how do I save well? What should I put my saving in? And when thinking about what you should put your saving in, realize that the least risk investment that you think from volatility is the least risk investment, which is cash, is the worst investment over a period of time. And you could judge that by judging the rate of inflation in relationship to the after-tax income you're going to earn. So if you have an inflation rate that's 2 or 3% and you're earning 1% and you have to pay taxes on that 1% or the 1 or 2% that you're going to get, you're going to get taxed essentially at 2% a year, and that's going to be a problem. So you have to move into assets that are other assets that are going to do better over a period of time. And when you do that, the most important thing I can convey to you is to diversify well, because I can guarantee you that one of those assets, and you won't be able to pick the right one, will be disastrous in your lifetime, that you will lose half of that savings if you're in the wrong one, and you won't know what the right one is. And so pick different countries, pick different asset classes, and I could probably take too long explaining how you might do that. But so that would be the second thing to learn. First thing is think about how to save. Be cautious about debt. When you're thinking about debt, think about, is that debt going to help my savings, or is it going to produce an income? Sometimes debt, like buying a house or buying an apartment or buying an asset, it produces forced savings. Forced savings is a good thing. Or if you're taking on debt and you're thinking, am I going to have that debt in an asset? That asset better produce more income than the cost of your debt. If you're using debt for consumption, that's not a good thing to do. Okay, you're giving up that safety. So number one is think about how much you save and think about whether that should be how you borrow. Number two, make sure that you think about the diversification of that, not in cash. And number three, do the opposite of what your instincts are. If you're going to play the game, it has to be the opposite of what your instincts and the crowd says, because the market reflects the crowd. So you want to buy when no one wants to buy, and you want to sell when no one wants to sell, right? Right. So, and that's emotionally difficult. And probably you're not going to play that game well, because it takes a lot of resources to play the game. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars each year to try to play that game well, and it's a tough game to play well. So I would caution you about the market timing game, but I would say that if you're going to do it in the ways that are uncomfortable, because they're opposite your instincts.
That's really good advice, Ray. One more thing that really resonated with me in the book was, if in the next downturn, some of the implications could be the impact on pension obligations, health care. Is my generation going to be on the hook for that?
Yeah. So we pay a lot of attention to debt, and we should, but pension obligations and health care obligations are just like debt. There are obligations that require cash to fund those things. And when you think about that, we don't have enough money to fund those things. And so there'll be a squeeze. And I think that's also part of this political conflict, because when you say to somebody that you're not going to be able to fully fund their pension, or how are you going to fund it, what are you going to take it away from in order to fund it? Or if you think about the healthcare issues and so on with the demographics, and those require taking things away from people that have been promised to people. And or do you print the money? These are issues that will be important for your generation.
And you know, not only are you an incredible money manager, but you're also a really big philanthropist. And when you're talking about the next downturn, you're also bringing up some big social issues, the wealth gap. How do you think about that? How do we address this issue? Because it sounds like it's going to be a very big problem.
Yeah, I think capitalism has got to work for all the people, and democracy's got to work for everybody. And we're in a situation right now, because of a lot of things, that it's not working for a large portion of the bottom 60%. I separated the averages to the bottom 60% and the top 40%. I could have done it the 80% or even 95%. And it's not working for a large percentage of the population. We don't have adequate education. We don't create bottoms. In many cases, my wife works in Connecticut to try to help what are called disengaged and disconnected youth. Let's give you a picture. Connecticut, which is the richest state in the country, or equal to the richest state in the country, has 22% of its high school students are disengaged or disconnected. Disengaged means they attend high school, but they don't really study, they just sort of get through. And disconnected means they don't even know where they are. 22%. Those students, those people are going to be on the street. That's a problem. There are school districts in which they have to share books, or in some cases even have to share pencils. They literally will break a pencil in half and sharpen it from both ends, or pass it around and so on. And that issue about opportunity in terms of education or even income opportunity. There's a population that in that bottom 60% where opiate use is rising and suicides are rising. That, I think there has to be considered a national emergency in which we create metrics. What are those conditions? And that there should be a dealing with that. I think that these things can be dealt with much, much better, but it has to be treated in a way that that's dealt with. And that has, by making them productive. I don't mean by giving money or by giving welfare, but by doing certain things, probably in private-public partnerships, in which the private sector, that could be business sector, together with the government sector, can do the checks and balances to make those things productive. I see many of these cases. I fund, for example, microfinance. Grameen America is one, but a number of those. And the capacity to lend somebody $1,000 and get paid back, not 99%, 98% payback rates. And that $1,000 can create the purchase of a rug cleaning piece of equipment, and that person's in business to be able to be productive. Those kinds of things need to be thought about, because if we don't have capitalism working for the majority of people, it's going to be threatened. And the same thing is democracy. The democracy is based on the notion of compromise to be able to bring people together and so on. I think if we have too much fragmentation, I think that these are the biggest risks. I think debt crises can be managed, but when you get into bad situations, as a basic principle, if you have rich and poor living together, and they have to decide how they're going to spend a budget, how they divide a pie, and you have an economic downturn, you're probably going to have a conflict. And I think that has to be dealt with.